To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Homecoming. The tarmac at Denver International Airport stretched endlessly under the harsh Colorado sun, mirroring the endless months Captain Derek Wolfe had spent in the mountains of Afghanistan. At 38, Derek carried himself with the disciplined posture of a career military man, broad shoulders squared, steel-gray eyes that missed nothing, and hands that had learned to be steady under the worst circumstances. His service record was impeccable. 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan, decorated for valor and respected by every soldier who'd served under him. The bus carrying returning soldiers pulled up to the terminal, and Derek felt something he hadn't experienced in 18 months. Nervousness. Not the tactical awareness that kept him alive in combat zones, but the flutter of a man about to reunite with the family he'd carried in his heart through every firefight, every sleepless night on watch, every moment when death felt closer than his next breath. His wife Monica had been his anchor since they'd met 12 years ago at a military charity fundraiser in Colorado Springs. She was working as an event coordinator then, her auburn hair catching the light as she moved efficiently through the crowd, her green eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Derek had been a young lieutenant fresh from his first deployment, and Monica had seemed like everything good about the world he was fighting to protect. Their daughter Lily, now 16, had been 4 when Derek first deployed. She used to run to the door whenever she heard his truck in the driveway, shrieking "Daddy," with pure joy. Their son Mason, 14, had inherited Derek's analytical mind but Monica's gentler nature, or so Derek had believed. As Derek walked through the terminal, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he spotted them near the arrivals gate. Monica stood with her arms crossed, her face carefully neutral. She'd lost weight, he noticed, and there was something different about her posture, less welcoming, more defensive. Lily and Mason flanked her, both staring at their phones rather than watching for him. "Hey," Derek said as he approached, setting down his bag and opening his arms for the embrace he'd dreamed about for months. Monica stepped forward, but the hug was brief, perfunctory. "Welcome home," she said, her voice lacking the warmth he remembered. "Dad?" Lily acknowledged with a quick glance up from her phone, but she made no move toward him. Mason at least looked up and nodded. "Hey, Dad." The drive home to their house in Monument was quiet except for Derek's attempts at conversation. He asked about school, about their friends, about the changes he'd noticed in town during his brief glimpses out the window. The responses were monosyllabic, distracted. Their house sat on 2 acres of pine-studded land, a place Derek had bought with the dream of giving his family space to grow, privacy, and a slice of the American dream he'd sworn to defend. Now, as they pulled into the driveway, it felt more like a fortress with walls he couldn't breach. That evening, Derek tried to re-establish routines. He'd always been the disciplinarian in the family, not harsh, but consistent. Structure and discipline had served him well in the military and had created a stable home environment before his deployment. "Lily, dinner's ready." "Put the phone away," Derek said as they sat down to Monica's lasagna. "I'm texting my friend about homework," Lily replied without looking up. "That can wait 30 minutes. Mom doesn't make me put it away." Derek looked at Monica, expecting support, but she just shrugged. "It's not worth the fight, Derek. Things have been different while you were gone." During dinner, Derek tried to share stories from his deployment, carefully edited ones about the Afghan people he'd worked with, the progress they'd made, the small victories that kept soldiers motivated. But his family seemed more interested in their own conversations, talking around him rather than with him. After dinner, Derek suggested a family movie night, another old tradition. "I have plans with friends," Lily said immediately. "On a school night?" Derek asked. "God, Dad, you're so strict. I'm 16, not 6. And I'm your father, not your buddy. You can see your friends on Friday." The explosion that followed caught Derek off guard. Lily's face flushed red as she stood up from the table. "This is exactly why we were happier when you were gone. You come back and immediately start ordering everyone around like we're your soldiers." Derek felt the words hit him like a physical blow, but his expression remained controlled. "Lily, that's enough." "No, it's not enough." She was shouting now. "Mom, tell him." Monica's voice was calm, deadly calm. "Derek, maybe we should talk." But before Derek could respond, Mason chimed in, his voice quieter but somehow more cutting. Dad, you're too strict. We like it better when you're gone. Everything was easier, more relaxed. We could just be a normal family. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Derek looked at his son, the boy he'd taught to throw a football, whose homework he'd helped with over video calls from half a world away, whose picture he'd carried in his helmet, and saw a stranger. Monica stood up slowly. Kids, go upstairs. Your father and I need to talk. When they were alone, Monica turned to face him, and Derek saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but cold resolution. The kids are happier without you around, she said, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. Maybe you should find your own place. Derek had faced enemy fire, improvised explosive devices, and mortar attacks with less shock than he felt in that moment. He studied his wife's face, looking for some sign of the woman he'd married, the woman whose picture he'd carried through 18 months of hell. I see, he said finally, his voice as controlled as it had been during his worst combat situations. Understood. Monica seemed surprised by his calm response, as if she'd expected him to argue, to plead, to fight for his family. But Derek had learned long ago that when a situation was beyond salvage, the smartest move was strategic withdrawal and reassessment. He walked to the kitchen, picked up his phone, and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. Richardson Law Firm. This is the answering service. This is Derek Wolf. I need to speak with Tom Richardson. Tell him it's urgent. While he waited for the call back, Derek stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the property he'd bought, the home he'd built, the life he'd fought to protect. In Afghanistan, the enemy was usually obvious. They shot at you. Here, the enemy wore familiar faces and spoke with voices he'd loved. His phone rang. Derek? Jesus, what time is it? Are you okay? Tom Richardson had been Derek's college roommate at the Air Force Academy before Derek had transferred to the Army, and Tom had left military service for law school. They'd stayed in touch over the years, and Tom had handled Derek's will and power of attorney before his deployments. Tom, I need a divorce attorney. The best you know. Derek slowed down. What happened? Are you back stateside? I got back today. My wife just told me to find my own place. My kids told me they were happier without me. There was a long pause. Tom Richardson was one of the few people who knew Derek well enough to understand what those words meant coming from a man who never showed weakness. Derek, I'm sorry, but are you sure you want to jump straight to? Tom. Derek's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in combat. I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Colorado Springs. Someone who understands military assets, deployment benefits, and child custody. And I need it tonight. Another pause. Her name is Patricia Vance. She's expensive, she's ruthless, and she doesn't lose. I'll text you her emergency contact number. Thanks, Tom. Derek, be careful. Don't do anything you'll regret. Derek almost smiled at that. Regret was a luxury he'd learned to live without. I won't regret anything, Tom. But they might. After hanging up, Derek called Patricia Vance's emergency line. Within 20 minutes, he had an appointment for first thing in the morning. Then he went upstairs, packed a single bag with enough clothes for a few days, and returned to the kitchen where Monica was cleaning up dinner. I'll be at the base tomorrow handling some paperwork, he said. After that, I'll be staying at a hotel until I can find a place. Monica turned around, and for just a moment, he saw surprise flicker across her face. Maybe she'd expected him to fight for his family, to beg, to make promises about changing. Derek, maybe we can work through this. The adjustment period is always hard after deployment. Derek looked at his wife, really looked at her, and noticed things his emotional shock had missed earlier. She was wearing a new perfume, something lighter and more expensive than what she usually chose. Her nails were perfectly manicured, something she'd rarely bothered with during their marriage. There was a glow about her that spoke of someone who'd been living life on her own terms. No, he said simply. We can't. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Monica, when this is over, you're going to wish you'd handled this differently. But it'll be too late then. Is that a threat? Derek's smile was cold, the same expression that had made enemy combatants step back during interrogations. No, it's a promise. He walked out into the Colorado night, threw his bag in his truck, and drove toward town. Behind him, the house he'd called home was lit up like a beacon, warm and welcoming. But that warmth wasn't for him anymore. Derek had learned something important in the military. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. His family had just shown him exactly where he stood in their priorities. Now it was time to show them where they stood in his. Chapter 2. Intelligence Gathering. The Marriott in Colorado Springs wasn't much to look at, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, it wasn't home. Derek checked in using his military credit card, one Monica had never had access to, and settled into a room that smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and other people's temporary lives. At 0600 hours, Derek was showered, dressed in his Class B uniform, and sitting in Patricia Vance's office. The attorney was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that evaluated everything like a battlefield commander assessing terrain. Captain Wolf, I've reviewed the basic information Tom Richardson sent over. 12 years of marriage, 2 children, significant military benefits, and what appears to be irreconcilable differences. She set down a legal pad covered in precise handwriting. But I get the feeling there's more to this story. Derek had spent the sleepless night thinking, analyzing the situation like a military operation. I think my wife is having an affair. What makes you think that? Derek outlined his observations from the previous evening. Monica's changed appearance, her defensive posture, the perfume, the manicured nails, and most telling, her complete lack of surprise when the children said they preferred life without him. It felt rehearsed, Derek said, like they'd practiced their responses. Patricia made notes. Any idea who? Not yet, but I intend to find out. Captain, I need to be clear about something. If you're planning any kind of surveillance or investigation that could be construed as stalking or harassment, I understand the legal boundaries, Derek interrupted. I also understand that knowledge is power, and right now, I don't have enough intelligence to make informed decisions. Patricia studied him for a long moment. You're not going to be one of those clients who falls apart emotionally, are you? No, ma'am. I'm going to be the client who wins. After leaving the attorney's office, Derek drove to Fort Carson. He needed to report back from deployment, handle his reassignment paperwork, and more importantly, he needed access to resources that weren't available to civilians. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres had served under Derek in Afghanistan. He was now stationed at Fort Carson in intelligence support, and he owed Derek his life after a particularly bad engagement outside Kandahar. Captain Wolf, Torres stood and saluted as Derek entered his office. Sir, I heard you were back. How was the homecoming? Complicated, Sergeant. I need a favor. Torres closed his office door. Anything, sir. Derek explained his situation in clinical terms, the dissolution of his marriage, the need for information, and the importance of understanding what had happened during his deployment. I need to know who my wife has been spending time with, Derek said. Phone records, social media activity, credit card statements, anything that can give me a picture of the last 6 months. Torres was quiet for a moment. Sir, that could be problematic if anyone found out. Mike, do you remember that night outside Kandahar when we were pinned down and you took shrapnel in your leg? Yes, sir. Do you remember what I told you when I carried you to the medevac? Torres nodded slowly. You said you never leave a man behind. I kept that promise then. I'm asking you to keep one now. 3 hours later, Derek had more information than he'd expected. Monica's phone records showed extensive communication with someone named Brian Cooper over the past 8 months. Her credit card statements revealed charges at restaurants Derek had never heard of, a hotel in Denver, and several purchases from Victoria's Secret, all while Derek was sending his combat pay home to support his family. But the most damaging evidence came from social media. Monica's Facebook account, which she'd apparently forgotten was linked to Derek's email notifications, showed a pattern of posts about enjoying life and discovering who I really am and photos from social events where she appeared to be with the same man. A tall, athletic-looking guy with designer clothes and an expensive smile. Brian Cooper turned out to be a real estate developer, divorced, with a reputation for pursuing married women. His Instagram account was a showcase of expensive cars, restaurant meals, and exotic trips. Derek found photos of Monica in several posts, though she was never tagged or named. That evening, Derek sat in his hotel room with a bottle of bourbon and a legal pad, planning his next moves like a military operation. He had confirmed his suspicions about Monica's affair, but he needed more intelligence before he could develop an effective strategy. His phone rang. Monica's number. Derek, we need to talk. I'm listening. The kids feel bad about last night. Maybe you could come over for dinner tomorrow, and we could all discuss this like adults. Derek almost laughed. Monica was trying to control the narrative, probably hoping to manipulate him into a reconciliation that would make her feel less guilty about her affair. What time? He asked. 6 o'clock? I'll make your favorite pot roast. I'll be there. After hanging up, Derek made another call to Patricia Vance. I need you to prepare divorce papers, he said. Full custody of both children, division of all assets including my military benefits, and I want her to understand that adultery affects property distribution in Colorado. Derek, slow down. You're talking about a scorched earth approach. Are you sure you want to? Patricia, I need you to understand something about me. I've spent my adult life in situations where showing mercy gets people killed. When someone betrays you in combat, they don't get a second chance because that second chance might cost the lives of everyone depending on you. This isn't combat, Derek, isn't it? The next evening, Derek arrived at his former home carrying a bottle of wine and a manila envelope. Monica had gone all out. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh rolls. The kids were dressed nicely and appeared to be making an effort to be pleasant. Dad, I'm sorry about last night, Lily said as they sat down to dinner. I was just frustrated about other stuff, and I took it out on you. Me too, Mason added. I didn't mean what I said about liking it better when you're gone. Derek nodded and smiled. I appreciate that. Family is important, and we should always be honest with each other. Monica beamed. See, I told you we could work through this. Families have rough patches after deployments, but we always find our way back to each other. During dinner, Derek was charming, funny, and engaged. He told stories about Afghanistan that made the kids laugh, asked about their friends and school activities, and generally behaved like the husband and father Monica remembered. After dinner, Monica suggested they watch a movie together. Just like old times, she said, curling up next to Derek on the couch. Derek waited until the kids were engrossed in the movie, then quietly excused himself to use the bathroom. Instead, he went to Monica's home office and plugged a small device into her computer, a gift from Sergeant Torres that would give him remote access to her email and files. When the movie ended, Derek stood up and picked up the manila envelope he'd brought. Before I go, Monica, I have something for you. Monica's face lit up. Derek, you didn't have to bring me a present. Oh, but I did. Derek handed her the envelope. Monica opened it, and Derek watched the color drain from her face as she saw the divorce papers, along with printed copies of her text messages with Brian Cooper and several photos from social media. Derek, I can explain. Kids, come here, Derek said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded soldiers. Lily and Mason appeared from the family room, looking confused. Derek faced his family, the people he'd risked his life to protect, the reason he'd endured 18 months of hell in Afghanistan, and made his final assessment. Lily, Mason, I want you to understand something about choices and consequences. Your mother has been having an affair with another man while I was deployed. She's been using the money I sent home to pay for dates with her boyfriend, and she's been lying to all of us about who she really is. Derek, stop, Monica said, panic creeping into her voice. And you too, Derek continued, looking at his children, told me yesterday that you were happier without me, that I was too strict, that you liked it better when I was gone. Dad, we didn't mean, Lily started. Yes, you did, and I believe you. So I'm going to give all of you exactly what you want. Derek walked to the door, then turned back one final time. Monica, you'll be served with divorce papers within the week. I'm requesting full custody of both children, but based on what they told me yesterday, I don't think they'll want to live with someone as strict as me. So you can have them. Derek, please, we can work this out, Monica said, tears starting to flow. Derek's expression didn't change. Monica, you made your choice 8 months ago. I just didn't know about it until now. But here's what you didn't know about me. I never forgive betrayal. Ever. You can't just walk away from your children. I'm not walking away. I'm giving them what they said they wanted, a life without their strict father. Consider it my final gift to this family. Derek walked out into the night, leaving behind the sound of Monica's sobs and his children's confused protests. As he drove back to his hotel, Derek felt something he hadn't experienced since his first firefight in Iraq. Absolute clarity about what needed to be done. His family had made their choice. Now it was time to make his. Chapter 3, Strategic Planning. Derek's hotel room had been transformed into a command center. Legal documents, financial records, surveillance photos, and tactical notes covered every flat surface. On his laptop screen, Brian Cooper's social media posts painted a picture of a man who collected trophies, expensive toys, exotic trips, and other men's wives. Patricia Vance had called that morning with an update on the divorce proceedings. Monica's attorney wants to negotiate. They're claiming temporary insanity due to the stress of your deployment, asking for counseling instead of divorce. What did you tell them? That my client doesn't negotiate with terrorists. Derek almost smiled. He'd chosen his attorney well. But divorce was just the opening move in a larger strategy. Derek had spent sleepless nights analyzing the situation from every angle, identifying his objectives and the resources available to achieve them. This wasn't about winning a legal case. It was about total victory. His first stop that morning was the Colorado Springs Police Department. Detective Lisa Hartwell had worked with Derek on a joint task force 3 years earlier, investigating a military contractor who'd been selling weapons to insurgents. She was smart, thorough, and most importantly, she understood the difference between justice and revenge. "Derek Wolf," she said as he entered her office. "I heard you were back from deployment. How are you adjusting to civilian life? Learning new things every day?" "Lisa, I need some advice on a personal matter." Derek explained his situation, the affair, the divorce, and his suspicions that there might be more to Brian Cooper than expensive clothes and smooth talk. "You want me to run a background check on your wife's boyfriend?" Lisa asked. "I want to know if he's the kind of man who should be around my children. If Monica's going to have them most of the time, I need to know they're safe." Lisa studied Derek for a long moment. "And if he's not safe, then I deal with it appropriately." 2 hours later, Derek had Brian Cooper's complete criminal history, financial records, and employment background. Cooper had 2 DUI convictions, a restraining order filed by his ex-wife for domestic violence, later dropped, and a civil lawsuit from a business partner who claimed Cooper had stolen client lists and sabotaged his real estate deals. More interestingly, Cooper was heavily in debt despite his flashy lifestyle. His real estate business was failing, he owed back taxes, and his expensive car was 3 months behind on payments. He was the kind of man who needed a sugar mama, and Monica, with her access to Derek's military benefits and deployment pay, fit the profile perfectly. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "The kids want to see you. Can you come over tonight?" Instead of responding, Derek drove to his house and parked across the street. At 4:30, Lily and Mason got off the school bus and went inside. At 5:15, Brian Cooper's BMW pulled into Derek's driveway. Derek watched through binoculars as Cooper walked up to his front door with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. Monica answered the door in a red dress Derek had never seen before, something tight and expensive that screamed second chance at youth. They kissed on Derek's front porch before going inside. Derek made a phone call. "Sergeant Torres, I need another favor." "Yes, sir. I need you to call Child Protective Services. Anonymous tip about a situation that might endanger the welfare of minors." Derek provided his home address and suggested they might want to investigate reports of alcohol abuse and domestic violence involving a man who had unsupervised access to children. He mentioned Brian Cooper by name and suggested they run a background check. "Sir, are you sure about this?" "Mike, those are my children in there with a man who has a history of violence against women. If something happened to them because I didn't act on intelligence I had, how would you feel?" "Understood, sir. I'll make the call." Derek's next stop was Brian Cooper's real estate office. The receptionist was a young blonde who looked starstruck when Derek introduced himself as a recently returned combat veteran interested in buying property. "Mr. Cooper is in a client meeting," she said, "but I can schedule you for tomorrow. Actually, I was hoping to surprise my wife. She's been working with Brian, Monica Wolf. Maybe you could help me coordinate something romantic." The receptionist's face lit up. "Oh, Monica. She's so sweet. Mr. Cooper talks about her all the time. They make such a cute couple." Derek maintained his friendly expression while filing away that information. Even Cooper's employees knew about the affair. "When do they usually meet? I want to make sure I don't interfere with their business appointments." "Usually Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and sometimes they have dinner meetings on weekends. Mr. Cooper says she's one of his most important clients." Derek thanked the receptionist and left, making a mental note to have Patricia subpoena Brian Cooper's business records. If Monica was using Derek's money to invest in real estate with her boyfriend, that was fraud. That evening, Derek received a call from Patricia Vance. "Derek, we have a problem. Child Protective Services showed up at your house tonight. Monica is furious, claiming you called them out of spite. Did they find anything concerning?" "They found a man with a domestic violence history in the house with your children. They've opened an investigation." "Good. Derek, this is playing with fire. If Monica can prove you made that call, she can't prove anything. But if CPS determines that my children are in an unsafe environment, that affects custody arrangements, doesn't it?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking like a chess player, not a client going through a divorce. I'm thinking like a father who won't let anyone hurt his children, even if those children don't want his protection." Derek's final stop that day was Brian Cooper's apartment complex, an upscale development that Cooper clearly couldn't afford. Derek had learned from his military intelligence training that the best way to understand an enemy was to know their weaknesses, their pressure points, and their escape routes. Cooper's apartment was on the second floor, with a view of the parking lot and a balcony that faced west. Derek noted the security cameras, the entry points, and the neighboring units. He also noticed that Cooper's BMW was parked in a visitor spot rather than a reserved space, probably because he couldn't afford the extra rent for a designated parking spot. A plan was forming in Derek's mind, something more comprehensive than a simple divorce. Monica and Brian had made the mistake of believing that Derek was just a soldier, disciplined, honorable, and bound by rules. They didn't understand that he was also a warrior who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to destroy the guilty. Derek drove back to his hotel and opened his laptop. He had one more piece of intelligence to gather before he could finalize his strategy. Monica's computer, thanks to the device Torres had provided, was an open book. Derek scrolled through 8 months of emails, photos, and documents that painted a picture of a woman who'd been planning her exit from their marriage long before Derek returned from deployment. But the most interesting discovery was a series of emails between Monica and Brian discussing their future plans. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to take Derek for everything he was worth. Monica had been gathering information about Derek's military benefits, his deployment pay, and his veterans' disability compensation. Brian had been advising her on how to maximize her settlement and minimize Derek's parental rights. In one email, Brian had written, "Once we get him out of the picture completely, we can really start living. Military guys are all the same. They think honor and duty mean something, but money is what really matters. By the time he figures out what's happening, it'll be too late." Monica's response, "The kids already prefer you over him anyway. Once the divorce is final, we can be a real family." Derek stared at the screen, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. They weren't just betraying him. They were planning to erase him completely from the lives of his children. Derek closed the laptop and poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. Tomorrow, he would set his plan in motion. But tonight, he allowed himself to grieve for the family he'd thought he had, the wife he'd thought he'd married, and the children who'd been turned against him by people who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. The grief lasted exactly 1 hour. After that, there was only the mission. Chapter 4, Opening Moves. Derek's phone rang at 0500 hours. Patricia Vance's voice was crisp despite the early hour. "We have a situation. Monica's attorney is claiming harassment and asking for a restraining order. The CPS visit, the divorce papers, and what they're calling suspicious surveillance of their client." Derek was already dressed and reviewing his tactical notes for the day. "What kind of evidence do they have?" "Nothing concrete, but they're painting a picture of an unstable veteran who can't handle his wife moving on." "Derek, we need to be careful here. If they can establish a pattern of harassment, they can't establish what doesn't exist. Monica made her choices, and now she's dealing with the consequences. That's not harassment, that's accountability." Derek ended the call and headed to Fort Carson. His reassignment meeting with Colonel Martinez was at 0800, but first he had another appointment. Captain Rebecca Stone had served 2 tours with Derek in Iraq and was now stationed at Fort Carson in the Judge Advocate General's office. She was one of the smartest legal minds Derek had encountered in the military, and more importantly, she understood the warrior mindset. "Derek, congratulations on making it home safely," she said as he entered her office. "Though I hear the home front is more challenging than the combat zone." "Rebecca, I need some advice on military regulations regarding financial support and family obligations. Derek explained his situation, carefully focusing on the legal aspects. If Monica was using his deployment pay and military benefits to fund an affair, there might be violations of military financial responsibility regulations. Derek, what you're describing could potentially affect her access to military spousal benefits, especially if you can prove financial infidelity. But pursuing that kind of case would require evidence. I understand. Captain Stone studied Derek's face. What aren't you telling me? Derek handed her a flash drive. Text messages between my wife and her boyfriend discussing how to maximize their take from military benefits and minimize my parental rights. They're not just having an affair, they're running a con. Stone plugged in the flash drive and read through the files Derek had compiled. Her expression grew darker with each document. Derek, this is conspiracy to commit fraud. They're planning to manipulate military benefits and family court proceedings for financial gain. What are my options? Officially, you report this to the appropriate authorities and let the system handle it. Stone looked directly at Derek. Unofficially, you make sure they understand that actions have consequences. Derek left Fort Carson with more than legal advice. He now had official documentation that Monica's affair constituted financial fraud against the military, which would affect not only their divorce settlement, but potentially result in criminal charges. His next stop was Brian Cooper's real estate office, but this time Derek wasn't playing the friendly potential client. He walked in wearing his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal visible, looking exactly like what he was, a decorated combat veteran with the bearing of someone who'd faced down enemies and won. I'd like to speak with Brian Cooper, Derek told the receptionist. Do you have an appointment? Tell him Captain Derek Wolf is here to discuss his relationship with my wife. The receptionist's face went pale. Within minutes, Brian Cooper emerged from his office, and Derek got his first close look at the man who'd been sleeping in his bed. Cooper was tall, athletic, with the kind of artificial confidence that came from expensive clothes and easy victories. But Derek noticed the micro-expressions, the slight widening of the eyes, the quick glance toward the exit, the unconscious step backward. Cooper recognized a predator when he saw one. Captain Wolf, Cooper said, extending his hand. I've heard so much about you. Derek ignored the handshake. Have you? What exactly has my wife told you about me? Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I know exactly what you are and what you've been doing. Derek's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in life-or-death situations. I know about the text messages planning to defraud military benefits. I know about your domestic violence history, and I know you're broke. Cooper's artificial confidence cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. Derek smiled, and Cooper took another step backward. Brian, let me explain something to you. I've spent the last 18 months dealing with people who shoot at me for a living. You're a real estate developer who preys on lonely wives. Do you understand the difference in our skill sets? Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. You see, you made a mistake when you chose my wife. You thought you were dealing with some deployed soldier who'd come home grateful for whatever scraps of family life you left him. But what you're actually dealing with is a man who's learned that sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to eliminate the threat completely. Derek leaned closer, and Cooper could see the cold calculation in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end your relationship with my wife. You're going to leave Colorado Springs. And you're going to disappear from our lives completely. And if I don't, Derek's smile widened. Then you'll discover just how creative a man can be when he has unlimited time, unlimited resources, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Derek turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Brian, you might want to check your credit report. I hear identity theft is a real problem these days. That afternoon, Derek received a call from Sergeant Torres. Sir, you asked me to monitor certain social media accounts. Brian Cooper just posted that he's taking an extended business trip to Phoenix. Leaving tonight. Derek felt a surge of satisfaction. One threat neutralized, but the war was far from over. His phone buzzed with a text from Monica. We need to talk. Brian told me you threatened him. Derek replied, home in 30 minutes. When Derek arrived at his house, Monica was waiting in the living room, her face a mixture of anger and fear. The kids were nowhere to be seen. You can't intimidate people just because you don't like the situation, Monica said as soon as he walked in. I didn't intimidate anyone. I had a conversation with a man who's been defrauding military benefits and planning to manipulate our children for financial gain. That's not true. Derek pulled out printed copies of Monica's emails with Brian. Then explained these. Monica's face went white as she read her own words planning Derek's financial and parental destruction. Derek, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You weren't just having an affair, Monica. You were planning to rob me blind and turn my children against me. And you were doing it with a man who has a history of domestic violence. Brian would never hurt me or the kids. Like he never hurt his ex-wife? Like he never got arrested for DUI with someone's children in the car? Derek's voice was deadly calm. You were so busy playing house with your boyfriend that you put our children in danger. Monica started crying, but Derek felt nothing. The woman he'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who'd betrayed everything he'd fought to protect. What do you want? Monica asked through her tears. I want you to understand that your choices have consequences. Brian Cooper is leaving town tonight because he realized that some fights aren't worth the risk. You should learn the same lesson. You can't destroy my life because you're angry. Derek stood up, and Monica instinctively moved backward. Monica, I haven't even started yet. Brian was just the appetizer. You're the main course. As Derek walked toward the door, Monica called after him. Derek, please. We can still work this out. The kids need their father and I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Derek turned back one last time. Monica, you made your choice when you started planning to destroy me. Now you get to live with the consequences. That night, Derek sat in his hotel room planning the next phase of his operation. Brian Cooper was gone, but he was just a symptom of the larger problem. Monica had shown her true nature, and she'd turned his children against him. Derek had always believed in proportional response. Match the level of aggression directed at you. But Monica hadn't just been aggressive. She'd been calculating, manipulative, and cruel. She'd used his love for his family as a weapon against him. Tomorrow, Derek would show Monica what real strategy looked like. Tonight, he allowed himself one final moment of regret for the family that had never really existed, and the marriage that had been a lie from the moment he'd deployed. Then he got back to work. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 5, Psychological Warfare. Monica's panicked voicemail was waiting when Derek woke up at 0530. Derek, please call me back. Something's wrong with my credit cards, and the bank is asking questions about our joint accounts. We need to talk. Derek deleted the message without calling back. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as planned. Patricia Vance had been busy executing Derek's instructions regarding their shared assets. Every joint account had been frozen pending divorce proceedings, every credit card had been canceled, and Monica's access to Derek's military benefits had been suspended pending the fraud investigation. But Derek's strategy went deeper than financial pressure. While Brian Cooper was driving toward Phoenix, Derek was implementing a comprehensive campaign designed to isolate Monica and demonstrate the real consequences of her choices. His first stop was Monument Elementary School, where he met with Principal Jennifer Walsh to discuss his children's educational needs during the divorce proceedings. Captain Wolf, I'm so sorry to hear about your family situation, Principal Walsh said as they sat in her office. Lily and Mason are good kids, but I have noticed some behavioral changes recently. What kind of changes? Lily's grades have dropped significantly, and she's been defiant with teachers. Mason has become withdrawn and isn't participating in activities he used to enjoy. And frankly, some of the other parents have mentioned concerns about men they don't recognize picking up the children. Derek felt genuine anger for the first time since this began, not at Monica or Brian, but at himself for not protecting his children from the chaos his wife had created. Principal Walsh, I need to make some changes to the authorized pickup list. Only my wife and I should be allowed to collect my children from school. If anyone else attempts pickup, I want to be notified immediately. Of course, Captain Wolf. And if you need any documentation for custody proceedings regarding the children's academic performance or behavioral issues, that might be helpful. Thank you. Derek's next stop was the financial advisor who'd been managing Monica's investment account, the one she'd been building using Derek's deployment pay. Robert Hayes was a family friend who'd known both Derek and Monica for years. Derek, welcome home, Hayes said, but his expression was troubled. I need to ask you some difficult questions about Monica's recent investment activities, such as, she's been moving large amounts of money into high-risk investments without your knowledge or consent. Some of these investments were recommended by someone she described as her business partner, a Brian Cooper. Derek nodded grimly. How much are we talking about? Nearly $40,000 from your deployment pay, plus she liquidated your children's college funds. Derek, I tried to contact you, but she said you'd authorized everything and didn't want to be bothered with financial details while deployed. The college funds. Derek felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Monica hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd stolen their children's future to fund her affair. Robert, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every recommendation from Brian Cooper. This is going to be evidence in fraud proceedings. That afternoon, Derek received a call from Detective Hartwell. Derek, I have some interesting information about your friend Brian Cooper. We just got a report from Phoenix PD. Cooper was arrested last night for assault and drunk driving. Apparently, he got into a bar fight and then tried to drive back to his hotel. Interesting timing. Derek, where were you last night between 9 and 11 p.m.? In my hotel room, on the phone with my attorney. What? Because someone called Cooper's hotel and told him that his ex-wife was spreading rumors about him at a specific bar in Phoenix. Cooper went to confront her, found out she wasn't there, got drunk, started a fight with some locals who didn't appreciate his attitude, and ended up in jail. Derek was quiet for a moment. That's unfortunate for Mr. Cooper. Derek, did you make that call? Lisa, I was dealing with my divorce attorney and CPS interviews about my children's welfare. I don't have time to worry about what Brian Cooper does in Phoenix. Well, Cooper's going to be in Arizona for a while. His bail hearing isn't until next week, and apparently, he can't afford a lawyer. After hanging up, Derek allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Brian Cooper's removal from the equation was proceeding faster than expected, but Derek hadn't had to lift a finger. Sometimes the best strategy was simply giving your enemies enough rope to hang themselves. That evening, Derek drove to his house for what he'd told Monica would be a final conversation about their divorce settlement. Monica was waiting with a bottle of wine and what appeared to be a peace offering, Derek's favorite dinner, and an outfit he'd always found attractive. Derek, I'm so glad you're here, Monica said, moving toward him with the kind of smile that had once made his heart race. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I made terrible mistakes. Derek sat down but didn't touch the wine. What kind of mistakes? The affair, obviously. I was lonely, confused, and Brian took advantage of that. But Derek, we can work through this. Couples survive infidelity all the time. Derek studied his wife's face. Even now, she was trying to manipulate him, to make herself the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of betrayal. What about the money, Monica? What money? The $40,000 you invested with Brian. The college funds you liquidated. The credit cards you maxed out while I was dodging bullets to pay our bills. Monica's practiced smile faltered. I can explain all of that. I'm sure you can. But first, let me share some news with you. Brian Cooper was arrested in Phoenix last night. Assault and DUI. He's looking at serious jail time. And apparently, he can't afford a lawyer because he's broke. Monica's face went pale. That's impossible. Brian has money, investments. Brian has debt, liens, and a criminal record. The only reason he was able to maintain his lifestyle was by spending other people's money, specifically our money. Derek leaned forward, and Monica instinctively moved backward. Monica, here's what you need to understand. Brian Cooper was a con artist who targeted military wives during deployments. You weren't his girlfriend, you were his mark. And now you're broke, facing fraud charges, and your boyfriend is in jail in another state. Derek, please, we can fix this. I love you. I've always loved you. Brian was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. Derek stood up, and Monica reached for his hand. Don't, Derek said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded soldiers. Don't touch me, don't lie to me, and don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was a mistake. What do you want me to do? I want you to understand that your choices have consequences. You chose Brian Cooper over your family. You chose fraud over honesty. You chose to turn our children against me. Now you get to live with those choices. Derek walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Monica? The kids asked me today why their college funds are gone. I told them to ask their mother. Lily cried for an hour. As Derek drove back to his hotel, his phone rang. Monica's number. Derek, please don't do this. I'll do anything to make this right. Monica, you had 18 months to make this right. Instead, you chose to make it worse every single day. Now it's too late. You're going to destroy our family over one mistake. Derek felt something cold and final in his voice. Monica, you destroyed this family the first time you brought another man into our bed. I'm just making sure everyone understands what you really are. Derek hung up and turned off his phone. Tomorrow, Monica would discover that her isolation was just beginning. Derek had learned something important in Afghanistan. When you're fighting an enemy who shows no mercy, the only winning strategy is to be more ruthless than they are. Monica had shown him no mercy when she planned his destruction. Now he would show her what real warfare looked like. Chapter 6. Total War. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, looked uncomfortable as she slid the documents across her desk to Monica. Derek watched through the security camera feed on his phone, another gift from Sergeant Torres, as his wife's face crumpled upon seeing her financial reality. Mrs. Wolf, I'm sorry, but your accounts have been frozen by court order pending divorce proceedings. Additionally, there are fraud allegations being investigated by federal authorities regarding misuse of military benefits. Derek had spent the morning at the FBI field office in Colorado Springs, meeting with Agent Sarah Kim, who specialized in military benefit fraud. The evidence Derek had compiled, the emails, the financial transactions, the coordination between Monica and Brian, painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. Captain Wolf, this is substantial evidence of conspiracy to defraud the federal government, Agent Kim had said. We're talking about potential prison time, not just divorce court. Agent Kim, I want my children protected, and I want everyone to understand that military benefits aren't toys for people to play games with. Derek's phone buzzed. Monica calling for the 15th time that morning. Instead of answering, Derek drove to the high school to meet with the guidance counselor about Lily's behavioral issues. What he learned made his blood run cold. Captain Wolf, Lily has been telling other students that her father is psychologically damaged from combat and that her mother is protecting the family from him. Counselor Margaret Torres, no relation to Sergeant Torres, explained. She's been describing you as unstable, potentially violent, and unable to adjust to civilian life. Derek felt the familiar cold rage that had kept him alive in combat zones. Where would she get those ideas? She says her mother and mother's boyfriend have been explaining PTSD to her, helping her understand why soldiers sometimes become dangerous to their families. Derek realized that Monica and Brian hadn't just been planning financial fraud. They'd been conducting a psychological warfare campaign against his own children, poisoning them against him using his military service as a weapon. Mrs. Torres, I need you to document everything Lily has said about me. Every conversation, every claim, every story she's been told. Captain Wolf, is it possible that you're experiencing some readjustment issues? Combat veterans often. Derek's expression stopped her mid-sentence. Mrs. Torres had just made the mistake of buying into the narrative Monica had been spreading. Ma'am, I've been psychologically evaluated by military professionals every 6 months for the past 5 years. I've never shown signs of PTSD, domestic violence, or inability to adjust. What I'm showing signs of is a father who's discovering that his wife has been systematically abusing his children. Abusing? What would you call convincing children that their father is dangerous? What would you call stealing their college funds to pay for an affair? What would you call exposing them to a man with a history of domestic violence? Mrs. Torres looked shaken. I hadn't thought of it that way. That afternoon, Derek met with Patricia Vance to review their strategy for the custody hearing scheduled for the following week. Derek, Monica's attorney is claiming that you're using your military training to intimidate and harass their client. They're painting you as an unstable veteran who can't handle rejection. What evidence do they have? Brian Cooper's statement about feeling threatened during your conversation at his office. Monica's claims that you've been surveilling her. The CPS investigation that they claim you initiated out of spite. Derek smiled coldly. And what evidence do we have? Patricia spread out the documents Derek had compiled over the past 2 weeks. Financial fraud, conspiracy, child endangerment, and systematic psychological abuse of minors. Plus, Brian Cooper's arrest record, his history of domestic violence, and his current legal troubles in Arizona. Who do you think the judge will believe? Honestly, you terrify me sometimes, Derek. I can't imagine what you're doing to them. That evening, Derek implemented the final phase of his psychological warfare campaign. He'd learned Monica's schedule through 3 weeks of observation. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she went to her book club at the local library. Except there was no book club, she'd been using that time to meet Brian Cooper. Derek arrived at the library at 6:30 p.m. and found Monica sitting alone at a corner table, staring at her phone. She looked exhausted, stressed, and for the first time since his return, genuinely scared. "Hello, Monica." She looked up with hope that quickly turned to fear when she saw his expression. "Derek, thank God you're here. I need to talk to you about these accusations. The FBI came to my work, my friends are asking questions, and the kids are confused about everything that's happening." Derek sat down across from her. "The kids are confused because you've been lying to them for months. You convinced them I was dangerous, that they were better off without me, that you were protecting them from their psychologically damaged father. I never said you were dangerous. Lily told her guidance counselor that I'm suffering from combat trauma and might become violent. Where did she get that idea?" Monica's face cracked slightly. "Brian thought it would help explain why you were so strict, so controlling. We were trying to help the kids understand. You were trying to turn my children against me using my military service as a weapon." Derek leaned forward, and Monica instinctively moved back. "Monica, do you want to know what real psychological warfare looks like?" "Derek, you're scaring me." "Good. Because for the past 3 weeks, I've been systematically dismantling everything you built with Brian Cooper. His business is ruined. Turns out when word gets out that a real estate developer is sleeping with his clients' wives and stealing their money, nobody wants to work with him. His reputation is destroyed, small towns talk, and everyone knows what he is now. His finances are in shambles. Funny how quickly creditors call in debts when they think someone's a flight risk." Monica was staring at him with growing horror. "Brian's in jail, Monica. He's broke, he's alone, and he's facing serious criminal charges. And you know what the beautiful part is? I didn't have to break a single law to destroy him. I just had to give people the truth about who he really was." "You ruined him." "No, Monica. He ruined himself when he chose to target my family. I just made sure everyone knew about it." Derek stood up, and Monica looked up at him with something that might have been recognition. The realization that the man she'd married was far more dangerous than she'd ever understood. "Derek, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can still." "Monica, you made your choice. You chose a con artist over your husband. You chose fraud over honesty. You chose to psychologically abuse our children rather than deal with your guilt. Now you get to live with the consequences. What about Lily and Mason? They're innocent in all this." Derek's expression didn't change. "No, they're not. They told me they were happier without me, that they liked it better when I was gone. They chose their side in this war, just like you did. They're children. They didn't understand what they were saying. They understood enough to hurt me deliberately. They understood enough to choose their cheating mother over their deployed father. They understood enough to believe I was dangerous rather than trust the man who'd protected them their entire lives." Derek walked toward the library exit, then turned back one final time. "Monica, you wanted to know what psychological warfare looks like. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, everyone will know exactly what kind of woman you are, what kind of mother you are, and what kind of choices you made. And your children will have to live with the shame of what their mother did for the rest of their lives." As Derek drove back to his hotel, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his first successful mission in Afghanistan: the satisfaction of a perfectly executed operation. Monica was isolated, Brian was neutralized, and the truth about their conspiracy was spreading through every channel that mattered. Tomorrow, Derek would receive confirmation that the custody hearing had been moved up due to new evidence regarding child welfare concerns. Monica would discover that her psychological warfare campaign against Derek had backfired spectacularly. But Derek wasn't finished yet. The final phase would demonstrate to everyone involved that Derek Wolfe never forgot a betrayal and never forgave anyone who turned his own children against him. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. The courthouse in Colorado Springs was bustling with the usual parade of human drama, but courtroom 3B fell silent when Derek walked in wearing his dress uniform, every medal and ribbon displayed with military precision. He'd learned long ago that perception was often more important than reality, and he wanted everyone present to understand exactly who they were dealing with. Monica sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, David Chun, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost weight. Her clothes hung loosely, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting panic. Derek felt nothing looking at her. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the cold assessment of a mission objective. Patricia Vance had outdone herself in preparation. Their table was covered with documentation that would paint a picture of systematic fraud, child endangerment, and psychological abuse. But Derek's secret weapon wasn't in any of those files. All rise for the Honorable Judge Rebecca Martinez. Judge Martinez was a veteran herself, having served as a JAG officer before transitioning to civilian courts. Derek had researched her background extensively. She had zero tolerance for fraud against military personnel and a particular hatred for anyone who endangered children. This is a custody hearing in the matter of Wolf versus Wolf, Judge Martinez began. I've reviewed the preliminary filings, and I have to say this is one of the most complex cases I've seen involving military families. Monica's attorney stood first. Your Honor, my client is seeking primary custody of the minor children based on Captain Wolf's inability to adjust to civilian life following his deployment. We have evidence of erratic behavior, intimidation tactics, and what appears to be a campaign of harassment against Mrs. Wolf and her associates. Derek almost smiled. Monica's attorney was leading with the psychological warfare narrative, not knowing that Derek had anticipated this exact strategy. Judge Martinez looked skeptical. What kind of evidence, counselor? Testimony from the children themselves about their father's strict and controlling behavior, documentation of intimidating conduct toward Mrs. Wolf's business associate, and a pattern of surveillance and harassment that began immediately upon Captain Wolf's return from deployment. Patricia Vance stood up. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that will provide crucial context for the court. Proceed, counselor. Patricia began methodically dismantling Monica's narrative. She presented bank records showing Monica's fraudulent use of military benefits, email communications between Monica and Brian Cooper planning Derek's financial destruction, and documentation of Brian Cooper's criminal history. Your Honor, what Mr. Chun is characterizing as adjustment issues is actually a decorated combat veteran's appropriate response to discovering that his wife had been systematically defrauding military benefits while conducting an affair with a man who has a history of domestic violence. Judge Martinez studied the documents. Mrs. Wolf, did you use your husband's deployment pay to fund personal investments without his knowledge or consent? Monica's attorney whispered urgently in her ear before she answered. Your Honor, I made some poor financial decisions during a difficult time, but, Mrs. Wolf, did you liquidate your children's college funds to invest in projects recommended by Brian Cooper? Monica's face crumpled. I thought they were good investments. I thought I was securing our future. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we'd also like to present testimony regarding the systematic psychological abuse of the minor children. Derek watched as Monica's face went pale. This was the moment he'd been building toward. Call your witness, counselor. We call Dr. Amanda Foster, child psychologist. Dr. Foster was a professional Derek had consulted after his meetings with the school counselor and principal. She'd interviewed both children extensively and had reached conclusions that would destroy Monica's custody case. Dr. Foster, in your professional opinion, have the Wolf children been subjected to psychological manipulation? Yes, absolutely. Both children have been systematically conditioned to fear and distrust their father using false information about combat trauma and military service. They've been told their father is potentially dangerous, psychologically damaged, and unable to properly care for them. Who provided this false information? According to the children, primarily their mother and her boyfriend, Brian Cooper. They described months of conversations designed to convince them that their father's military service made him unsuitable as a parent. Judge Martinez looked directly at Monica. Mrs. Wolf, did you tell your children that their father was psychologically damaged from combat service? Monica's attorney tried to object, but Judge Martinez cut him off. Mrs. Wolf, answer the question. Brian thought it would help them understand why Derek was so strict, so controlling. We weren't trying to hurt anyone. Mrs. Wolf, Captain Wolf's military psychological evaluations show no signs of combat trauma, PTSD, or adjustment disorders. Were you aware of this when you told your children he was dangerous? Monica started crying, but Derek felt nothing. She'd made her choice to weaponize his military service against his own children. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we'd like to call our final witness. Derek stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to speak for myself. Judge Martinez nodded. Captain Wolf, you have the floor. Derek walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a man who'd testified before congressional committees about military operations. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of command. Your Honor, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. I've been shot at, mortared, and ambushed. I've lost friends to enemy action and watched good soldiers die protecting the freedoms we all enjoy. Derek looked directly at Monica. But nothing I experienced in combat prepared me for coming home to discover that my own family had declared war on me. My wife stole from me, lied to me, and turned my children against me using my military service as a weapon. My children told me they were happier without me, that they preferred life when I was gone. Derek's voice remained calm, controlled, but everyone in the courtroom could feel the steel beneath it. Your Honor, I've been accused of being unable to adjust to civilian life. But the truth is, I adjusted perfectly. I came home expecting to protect and provide for my family. When I discovered they were the enemy, I adapted my tactics accordingly. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Captain Wolf, what are you requesting from this court? I'm requesting that my children be placed in an environment where they won't be psychologically manipulated, financially endangered, or exposed to criminals with histories of domestic violence. If that means they live with me, then I accept that responsibility. If it means they continue to live with their mother, then they'll have to live with the consequences of the choices she's made. Derek looked at his children, who were sitting in the gallery looking confused and frightened. Your Honor, Lily and Mason told me they were happier without me. I believe them. Children deserve to live with the parent they choose. But children also deserve to understand the truth about the choices their parents make and the consequences of those choices. Derek turned back to Judge Martinez. I'm not asking this court to force my children to love me. I'm asking this court to ensure they understand the truth about what happened to their family and why. Judge Martinez was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the documents spread before her. Mrs. Wolf, you've committed fraud against military benefits, endangered your children by exposing them to a man with a criminal history, and systematically psychologically abused your children by convincing them their father was dangerous. Mr. Chun, I don't know what defense you could possibly mount for this behavior. Monica's attorney looked defeated. Your Honor, my client made mistakes during a difficult time, but she loves her children and, Counselor, love doesn't justify fraud, child endangerment, or psychological abuse. Judge Martinez looked at both parties. I'm granting primary custody to Captain Wolf, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Wolf pending completion of family counseling and financial restitution. Mrs. Wolf, you will repay all fraudulently obtained military benefits, and you will submit to psychological evaluation before unsupervised contact with the minor children is restored. Derek felt something like satisfaction, but it was cold, clinical. He'd won, but victory felt hollow when the battlefield was his own family. As they left the courthouse, Lily and Mason approached Derek with tears in their eyes. Dad, we didn't understand what was happening, Lily said. Mom told us you might not be able to take care of us because of the war. Derek looked at his children, really looked at them, and saw the confusion and pain that Monica's manipulation had caused. Lily, Mason, you made your choices. You told me you were happier without me. I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for. What do you mean? Mason asked. You'll live with me because the court ordered it, but I won't try to be your father anymore. You made it clear that my love, my protection, and my sacrifice meant nothing to you. I accept that. Derek walked toward his truck, leaving his children standing on the courthouse steps. He'd won the war, but the victory felt exactly like what it was, the destruction of everything he'd once hoped to protect. Chapter 8, Aftermath. 6 months after the custody hearing, Derek sat in his new house, a simple ranch-style home 20 minutes from Fort Carson, reviewing his children's report cards. Lily's grades had improved significantly. Mason had joined the robotics club, and both children were seeing a counselor to help them process the truth about their family's destruction. But the house felt more like a military barracks than a home. Derek provided structure, discipline, and everything his children needed, but the warmth was gone. He'd kept his promise. He was their guardian, not their father. The doorbell rang at precisely 1800 hours. Monica stood on the porch, looking nervous and hesitant. This was her first unsupervised visit since completing 6 months of court-ordered counseling and paying $47,000 in restitution for her fraud. Derek, Thank you for letting me see them. Derek stepped aside without comment. Monica had lost weight, her hair was shorter, and she worked now as a receptionist at a medical clinic. The only job she could get after her fraud conviction became public record. They're in the living room doing homework, Derek said. You have 2 hours. Derek retreated to his home office, where he could monitor the conversation through the security system he'd installed. He'd learned not to trust anyone with his children's welfare. Through the camera, Derek watched as Lily and Mason greeted their mother with polite but distant hugs. The easy affection was gone, replaced by the careful politeness of children who'd learned that adults lie. Mom, how's your new apartment? Lily asked. It's small, but it's comfortable. Maybe next month you can spend a weekend with me. Derek noted that Monica didn't mention that her apartment was actually a studio efficiency, or that she could barely afford it on her receptionist's salary. Mom, Mason said quietly, why did you tell us Dad was dangerous? The counselor says he never had PTSD or any problems from the war. Monica's face crumpled slightly. Mason, I was confused and scared. Brian told me things about soldiers that weren't true, and I believed him because I was lonely. But you knew Dad wasn't like that, Lily said. You knew he never hurt anyone or acted crazy. Why did you lie to us? Derek watched his ex-wife struggle to answer his daughter's question. The truth was that Monica had been willing to destroy her children's relationship with their father to justify her own betrayal, but she couldn't say that to a 16-year-old. I made terrible mistakes, Monica said finally. I hurt all of you, and I can't undo that. Dad doesn't talk to us much anymore, Mason said. He takes care of us, but it's like he's not really our dad anymore. Derek felt something twist in his chest. His children had noticed his emotional withdrawal, but they didn't understand it was their own words, "We're happier without you," that had killed the father in him. After Monica left, Derek found his children in the kitchen, looking subdued. Dad, Lily said carefully, can we talk? Derek looked up from his laptop. What do you need? We know you heard our conversation with Mom. We know you have cameras everywhere. Derek didn't deny it. Security is important. Dad, we understand now that Mom lied to us, that she made us say things that hurt you. We were wrong to tell you we were happier without you. Derek studied his daughter's face. Lily looked older than her 16 years, as if the destruction of her family had forced her to grow up too quickly. You told me the truth as you understood it then, Derek said. Children don't usually lie about their feelings toward their parents. But Mom made us believe things that weren't true. Lily, at some point, you chose to believe your mother's lies rather than trust the father who'd protected you your entire lives. That was your choice. Mason stepped forward. Dad, we were kids. We didn't understand what was really happening. Derek looked at his son, a boy who'd inherited Derek's analytical mind, but hadn't yet learned how to use it as a shield against betrayal. Mason, you're 14 years old. Old enough to distinguish between truth and manipulation. Old enough to show loyalty to the people who've earned it. You chose to side with your mother and her boyfriend against me. Dad, please, Lily said, tears starting to flow. We love you. We want our real dad back, not this stranger who just takes care of us like we're his job. Derek felt the familiar cold assessment that had kept him alive in combat zones. His children wanted his love back, but love was a vulnerability that had nearly destroyed him. They'd proven they could be turned against him once. They could be turned against him again. Lily, I am taking care of you. You have food, shelter, education, and medical care. You have structure and discipline. What more do you need? We need our dad. Mason shouted, the first real emotion Derek had seen from him in months. We need the dad who taught me to throw a football and helped Lily with her science projects and told us stories about his missions. Derek stood up slowly, and both children instinctively stepped back. The gesture reminded Derek of how Monica had reacted when she finally understood what she'd awakened in him. That dad died in Afghanistan, Derek said quietly. He died the day his family told him they were happier without him. What you have now is what you asked for, a guardian who provides for your needs without the emotional attachment that made him vulnerable to betrayal. Dad, that's not fair, Lily protested. Fair. Derek's voice carried the edge that had made enemy combatants step back during interrogations. Was it fair when your mother stole your college funds to pay for dates with her boyfriend? Was it fair when she convinced you I was psychologically damaged and dangerous? Was it fair when you told a decorated combat veteran that you preferred life without him? Both children were crying now, but Derek felt nothing. He'd learned to kill that part of himself that could be hurt by their tears. You wanted a father who wasn't strict, who didn't have rules, who let you do whatever you wanted. Congratulations. That's exactly what you have now. I provide for your needs, but I don't have expectations or demands. You're free to make your own choices and live with your own consequences. Derek walked toward his office, then stopped and turned back. Your mother destroyed this family, but you helped her do it. Now you all get to live with what you created. That night, Derek sat in his office reviewing intelligence reports from his new assignment, training soldiers for deployment to conflict zones. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Dad, please don't give up on us. We know we hurt you, but we want to make it right. Derek stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. He'd learned something important in the aftermath of his family's betrayal. Forgiveness was a luxury that warriors couldn't afford. The moment you forgave someone for betraying you, you made yourself vulnerable to the next betrayal. His children wanted their father back, but that father had been weak enough to love unconditionally, to trust completely, and to believe that family loyalty was unbreakable. Derek had killed that weakness along with the love that made it possible. The man who remained was exactly what his family had created, a guardian who would protect them from external threats, but would never again give them the power to destroy him from within. Outside, Colorado Springs spread out under a canopy of stars, beautiful and cold. Derek had everything he'd fought for. His children were safe, his ex-wife had been held accountable, and justice had been served. But victory had come at a price that couldn't be measured in court settlements or custody agreements. Derek had won the war by becoming someone his children could never hurt again. He'd also become someone they could never love again. And for the first time since this began, Derek wondered if that made him the victor or the casualty. Chapter 9. The Price of Victory. 2 years had passed since the custody hearing, and Derek's house had settled into the rhythm of a well-run military operation. Meals at precise times, homework supervised but not assisted, household duties distributed with military efficiency. Lily was now 18 and preparing for college. Mason was 16 and had grown tall and serious like his father. Derek sat in his home office on a Saturday morning, reviewing Lily's acceptance letter to Colorado State University. She'd been accepted with a partial academic scholarship. Impressive, considering her grades had been dismal during the chaos of the divorce. A knock on his door interrupted his review. Lily stood in the doorway, dressed for her Saturday job at the local bookstore. Dad, can we talk before I leave for work? Derek gestured to the chair across from his desk. Lily sat down, but instead of the casual slouch typical of teenagers, she sat with straight posture. One of the many changes Derek had noticed as his children adapted to living with him. I got the acceptance letter to CSU, Lily said. I saw. Congratulations. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Derek looked up from his paperwork. Over the past 2 years, his children had learned that he always answered direct questions honestly, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. When I leave for college, are you going to miss me? The question caught Derek off guard. He studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation or emotional manipulation, but found only genuine curiosity tinged with sadness. Miss you how? Derek asked, like a father misses his daughter, not like a commanding officer misses a good soldier. Derek set down his pen and really looked at Lily. 18 years old, she'd grown into a young woman who resembled Monica physically, but had developed Derek's direct communication style and analytical thinking. Why does it matter? Derek asked. Because I've spent the last 2 years trying to earn back your love, and I can't tell if it's worked. Derek felt something stir in his chest, not the warm affection he'd once felt for his children, but something harder to define. Respect, perhaps. Recognition of strength earned through adversity. Lily, love makes people vulnerable. It makes them make bad decisions, overlook red flags, and trust people who don't deserve it. Love is what made me weak enough for your mother to destroy. So you don't love Mason and me anymore? Derek was quiet for a long moment. I care about your welfare. I want you to succeed. I'm proud of your academic recovery and your work ethic. But love? Love is what made me believe that family loyalty was unbreakable, that my children would never choose someone else over their father who'd sacrificed everything for them. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Dad, we were kids. We didn't understand what Mom was doing to us, to you, to our family. You understood enough to hurt me deliberately when I needed your support most. But we've spent 2 years trying to make up for that." Derek studied his daughter's face. She was right. Both children had worked hard to regain his respect, his approval, his trust. But trust and love were different things entirely. "Lily, you've proven you can be disciplined, responsible, and trustworthy. You've earned my respect. But the father who loved you unconditionally died the night you told me you were happier without me. Can't you forgive us? Can't you choose to love us again?" Derek felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Forgiveness is what weak people do when they can't accept that some betrayals are permanent. Love is what I felt before I learned that even my own children could be turned against me. Lily stood up, tears flowing freely now. "Dad, you're punishing us for something Mom did to all of us." "No, Lily. I'm protecting myself from something you proved you were capable of doing." That afternoon, Derek received a call from Patricia Vance. "Derek, I have some news about Monica and Brian Cooper." Derek leaned back in his chair. He'd heard occasional updates about his ex-wife's struggles to rebuild her life, but Brian Cooper had disappeared completely after his arrest in Phoenix. Cooper was found dead in a motel room in Tucson 2 weeks ago. Apparent suicide. He left a note apologizing to his ex-wife and mentioning something about destroying good families for money. Derek felt nothing at the news. Brian Cooper had been a weak man who'd preyed on vulnerable women and had ultimately destroyed himself when his schemes collapsed. What about Monica? Still working at the medical clinic, still living in that studio apartment. "Derek, she's asked me to contact you about something." "I'm listening." "She wants to know if you'd consider family counseling with her and the kids. She says she's learned things in therapy that she wants to share with you." Derek almost laughed. "Patricia, tell Monica that the time for family counseling was before she decided to commit fraud and turn my children against me. It's too late now." "Derek, the kids are asking for this too. Lily's going to college soon, and Mason will be 18 in 2 years. This might be your last chance to have a real relationship with them." "I have a relationship with them. I'm their guardian." "That's not the same thing as being their father." Derek ended the call and walked to the kitchen, where Mason was making himself a sandwich. His son had grown 6 inches in the past 2 years and now stood nearly as tall as Derek, with the same broad shoulders and steady hands. "Dad, I heard Lily talking to you this morning," Mason said without looking up from his sandwich. "What did you hear?" "That you don't love us anymore because we hurt you when Mom was lying to us." Derek poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from his son. "What do you think about that?" Mason looked directly at Derek, another change from the boy who used to avoid eye contact during difficult conversations. "I think you loved us so much that when we betrayed you, it nearly killed you. So you killed that part of yourself to survive." Derek was impressed by his son's analysis. "That's very astute. Dad, I understand why you had to protect yourself. But I also understand that Lily and I lost our father because we were stupid enough to believe Mom's lies." "Mason, what do you want me to say?" "I want you to say that someday, maybe, you might let yourself care about us again. Not now, but someday." Derek studied his son's face. Mason had inherited Derek's analytical mind, but unlike Derek, he'd retained the capacity for hope. "Son, caring about people gives them power to hurt you. I learned that lesson the hard way. But Dad, not caring about people makes you invulnerable but alone." Derek felt something crack in his chest, not the warm flood of paternal love, but recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. That evening, Derek sat on his back porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in brilliant orange and red. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Dad, I love you even if you can't love me back. I always will." For the first time in 2 years, Derek felt something other than cold assessment when he thought about his children. Not love. He wasn't sure he was capable of that anymore, but something warmer than respect, deeper than duty. His family had been destroyed by betrayal, greed, and manipulation. His children had been weapons used against him by a woman who'd valued her momentary happiness over the welfare of everyone she was supposed to protect. Derek had won the war by becoming someone who couldn't be hurt again. But victory had cost him the capacity to feel the love that made family meaningful. Derek looked at his phone and began typing a response to Lily's text. Then he stopped, deleted the message, and put the phone away. Some wounds were too deep to heal. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive. Some victories were too costly to celebrate. Derek had everything he'd fought for. His children were safe. His ex-wife had been held accountable. and he'd proven that betraying him came with consequences that lasted forever. But as he sat watching the Colorado sunset, Derek realized that the most ruthless revenge of all might be the one he'd inflicted on himself. The complete destruction of his capacity to be the father his children desperately wanted him to be again. He'd won the war by killing everything worth fighting for. And for Derek Wolfe, decorated combat veteran and master of strategic warfare, that was the most perfect victory of all, one that ensured he could never be defeated again because there was nothing left in him worth destroying. The sun set behind the mountains, beautiful and cold, like everything else in Derek's carefully controlled world. He'd gotten exactly what he'd demanded, a life where betrayal was impossible because love no longer existed. It was, Derek reflected, the most successful military operation he'd ever conducted, and the most hollow victory he'd ever achieved. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.